Late one evening, Alex stumbled upon a thread on Reddit titled True Horror Stories. It was filled with eerie tales of ghostly encounters, unexplained phenomena, and spine-chilling experiences. The one that caught Alex's eye was posted by a user named ShadowWalker22, who claimed to have encountered something beyond comprehension. As he read, the words seemed to leap off the screen, pulling him into a nightmarish world. ShadowWalker22's post began with a warning. "What I'm about to share is not for the faint of heart. If you have any sense of self-preservation, stop listening now." Intrigued, Alex continued. "My story starts in an old, decrepit house that my family inherited from my great-uncle. It was isolated, surrounded by dense woods, and had been abandoned for years. Despite its eerie appearance, my parents decided to move in temporarily while we renovated our own home. From the first night, I felt uneasy. The house seemed to breathe with its own life. Strange noises echoed through the hallways, whispers, footsteps, and occasionally, a distant, haunting melody. My parents brushed it off as the house settling, but I wasn't convinced. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a soft scratching at my door. I froze, holding my breath. The scratching grew louder, more insistent. Summoning my courage, I opened the door. There was nothing there. Just an empty hallway bathed in moonlight. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was my imagination. But the occurrences grew more frequent. Objects moved on their own, cold spots appeared out of nowhere, and I constantly felt watched. One evening I decided to explore the basement, a place my parents strictly forbade me to go. Armed with a flashlight, I descended the creaky stairs. The air grew colder with each step, and an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. At the bottom of the stairs, I saw an old, dusty mirror. Its surface was foggy, but as I approached, I noticed something strange. My reflection was distorted, almost twisted. And then behind me, I saw a shadowy figure. Panicking, I spun around, but there was nothing there. I turned back to the mirror, and the figure was closer. Its eyes, hollow and dark, seemed to bore into my soul. I ran upstairs, slamming the basement door behind me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I felt a presence in my room, watching, waiting. At around 3 a.m., the witching hour, I heard the scratching again. But this time, it was coming from inside my room. I turned on my flashlight, and to my horror, I saw a face peering at me from the corner of the room. Pale, with sunken eyes and a gaping mouth, it looked like it was silently screaming. I screamed, waking my parents. When they rushed in, the figure vanished. They found me hysterical, pointing to an empty corner. They decided we would leave the house the next day. As we packed, I found an old journal belonging to my great-uncle. His final entry sent chills down my spine. "The shadows are coming for me. They whisper my name, promising torment. I cannot escape them. They are in the walls, the mirrors. They are everywhere." We left that house and never looked back. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the scratching. And in mirrors, I occasionally see a shadowy figure watching me, waiting. Alex finished reading, a cold sweat running down his back. The room seemed darker, the shadows deeper. He glanced at the mirror across the room, half expecting to see a twisted reflection or a shadowy figure. Suddenly, his phone buzzed with a new Reddit notification. It was from ShadowWalker22. "Did you enjoy my story? Remember, the shadows are always watching." Alex's heart raced as the screen flickered. The reflection in his phone's screen showed a shadowy figure standing right behind him. He spun around, but his room was empty. Terrified, Alex turned back to his phone, only to see the screen go black. The room was silent except for a soft, insistent scratching at his door. He knew he shouldn't open it, but he couldn't help himself. As he reached for the handle, the scratching grew louder, more frantic. With a deep breath, he opened the door, and the darkness beyond seemed to swallow him whole. The next morning, Alex's apartment was empty. His phone lay on the floor, the Reddit app still open. A new post appeared on the True Horror Stories thread from a user named Echo in the Dark. It simply read, "The shadows have claimed another. Beware the stories you read, for they might just read you back." In a quiet rural town, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, there was a place known to the locals as the Whispering Woods. The townspeople avoided it, sharing hushed stories about eerie occurrences and missing persons. Outsiders often dismissed these tales as mere superstition, but the locals knew better. A young journalist named Emily, eager to make a name for herself, arrived in the town to investigate the legends. She was skeptical but intrigued by the mystery surrounding the woods. Determined to uncover the truth, she packed her equipment and set out to explore the forbidden forest. The sky was overcast as Emily entered the woods. The air was thick with an unsettling silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. The deeper she ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. Despite the ominous feeling, she pressed on, her curiosity driving her forward. Hours passed, and Emily began to feel a creeping unease. The trees seemed to close in around her, their twisted branches resembling skeletal hands. She pulled out her camera and started taking photos, hoping to capture something that would explain the town's fear. As she reviewed the images, her heart skipped a beat. There were shadowy figures in the background of several photos, figures that hadn't been there moments before. Trying to rationalize what she saw, Emily continued her exploration. She stumbled upon an old, decrepit cabin. The door hung ajar, creaking eerily in the wind. Mustering her courage, she stepped inside. The interior was covered in dust, with broken furniture scattered about. An old diary lay on a table, its pages yellowed and brittle. Emily opened the diary, its entries filled with increasingly frantic handwriting. It detailed the experiences of a previous inhabitant, a man driven mad by the whispers. He described how the forest spoke to him, how the shadows followed him, and how he could no longer distinguish reality from nightmare. The final entry was a chilling warning. The forest has eyes. Once you hear the whispers, there is no escape. As Emily read the last words, she heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper. Her blood ran cold as the whispering grew louder, more insistent. It seemed to come from all around her, as if the forest itself was speaking to her. Panic set in, and she bolted from the cabin, running blindly through the woods. The whispers pursued her, growing more menacing with each step. Emily's mind raced, remembering the stories of those who had entered the woods and never returned. She stumbled and fell, her flashlight rolling away and casting long, distorted shadows. She scrambled to her feet, only to find herself surrounded by the shadowy figures from her photos. Their forms were barely human, twisted and dark, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. The whispers now formed coherent words echoing in her mind. "Join us. Stay with us forever." Desperate, Emily tried to run, but her legs felt heavy, as if the forest floor itself was pulling her down. The shadows closed in, their touch icy and suffocating. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness. Back in the town, days turned into weeks with no sign of Emily. The locals, knowing better than to search the Whispering Woods, mourned the loss of another curious soul. Her disappearance became just another tale, a cautionary story told to keep others from venturing into the haunted forest. Months later, a group of hikers, oblivious to the local legends, entered the woods. They stumbled upon an old camera covered in dirt and leaves. Curious, they turned it on and found a single photo. Emily's terrified face, her eyes wide with fear, and behind her, the shadowy figures watching, waiting. The hikers fled the woods, leaving the camera behind. They never spoke of what they saw, but the legend of the Whispering Woods grew stronger. The forest, it seemed, had claimed another victim, and its whispers continued to lure the unwary into its dark embrace. On the outskirts of a small, fog-laden town stood the Brackenridge house, a grand yet decaying mansion that had been abandoned for decades. The townsfolk spoke of it in hushed tones, sharing tales of ghostly apparitions and unexplained events. Despite its ominous reputation, it attracted thrill-seekers and curious souls, most of whom left more frightened than they arrived. One such thrill-seeker was Daniel, a college student with a passion for the paranormal. Determined to prove his bravery and capture evidence of the supernatural, he decided to spend a night in Brackenridge House. Armed with a flashlight, a camera, and a recorder, Daniel entered the mansion just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air inside was thick with dust and decay. Cobwebs draped from the ceiling, and the floorboards creaked underfoot. Daniel set up his equipment in the grand foyer, the once stately room now a shadow of its former glory. As he started his investigation, the house seemed to hum with an almost palpable energy. Hours passed with little activity. Daniel explored the many rooms, documenting their state and recording any strange sounds. The house seemed eerily silent, as if holding its breath. Frustrated by the lack of evidence, Daniel settled in a room on the second floor, rumored to be the epicenter of the hauntings. As midnight approached, the temperature dropped noticeably. Daniel wrapped his jacket tighter around him, his breath visible in the cold air. He decided to try a spirit box session, a device that supposedly allowed communication with spirits through radio frequencies. "Is there anyone here with me?" Daniel asked, his voice steady despite the growing unease. At first there was only static, but then a faint voice crackled through. "Leave!" Daniel's heart raced. "Why do you want me to leave?" The static grew louder, the voice more insistent. "Danger!" Suddenly the room's atmosphere shifted. The air grew heavy, and Daniel felt an overwhelming sense of dread. His flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows on the walls. He turned in a slow circle, trying to pinpoint the source of his fear. Then he saw it, a figure standing in the corner, barely visible in the dim light. The figure was a woman, her form translucent and flickering like a flame. She wore a tattered gown, her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. She reached out to Daniel, her mouth moving as if trying to speak, but no sound came out. Panicking, Daniel snapped a photo, the flash briefly illuminating the room. When his eyes adjusted, the figure was gone. He reviewed the photo, hoping to capture the apparition, but the image was distorted, as if something had interfered with the camera. Determined to get more evidence, Daniel continued his investigation, though his nerves were frayed. As he moved from room to room, he felt the presence following him, growing more aggressive. Doors slammed shut, whispers filled the air, and cold, invisible hands brushed against his skin. In the dining room, Daniel found an old, ornate mirror. Its surface was cracked, reflecting a distorted version of the room. As he gazed into it, he saw not his own reflection, but that of the ghostly woman. She stood behind him, her eyes pleading. Suddenly, the mirror shattered, sending shards flying. Daniel shielded his face, but a deep cut formed on his cheek. Blood trickled down, and the whispers grew louder, more frantic. "Leave now," they urged. But Daniel was frozen with fear. The house seemed to pulse with anger, the walls closing in on him. Finally, summoning all his strength, Daniel ran. He stumbled down the stairs, the ghostly figure chasing him, her wails echoing through the halls. He burst through the front door, not stopping until he reached the safety of his car. As he sped away, he looked back to see the Brackenridge house looming in the fog. its windows glowing with an unnatural light. Daniel never spoke of his night in the mansion, but the evidence he gathered told the story. The photos were filled with shadowy figures and distorted faces. The recordings captured eerie voices and unexplainable sounds. The townsfolk, hearing of his experience, avoided Brackenridge House even more diligently. The mansion stood, silent and foreboding, waiting for the next curious soul to wander in. And from that day on, Daniel knew one thing for certain. The house was not just haunted, it was alive, and it did not welcome intruders.